everybody on vacation.
Yeah.
Really?
What's over that, man?
That was.
And it's like, well, you know, it's 40% county, 40% city, and then 20. And I was like, what?
Rob.
He's like, yeah. I was like, yeah, that's news to me.
All the leaders are gone. You leave them. What else is she?
This is a special meeting, no regular report.
Yeah, no, not today. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Time is now 4 o'clock. We'll call this work session to order. First thing on the agenda is Parker Poe, but they are not here yet. So we'll jump right on down, Mr. Beatty and Stantec.
All right, good afternoon. David Beatty here with Stantec.
He's a lot
I've got a revised transportation needs assessment to hand out today and make available to the committee. And the list dated June 3rd still includes the Central Midlands Council of Government projects and includes the remaining Richland 2012 projects. It also includes Richland County programmatic categories of dirt road paving, sidewalks, and resurfacing. Municipal projects that have been provided by Blythewood, Irmo, Village Acres. A City of Columbia list has been revised and included in today's overall list. SCDOT traffic engineering staff have provided input. The University of South Carolina. We continue to show public input. And lastly, we have included the request by the comment. So this is a updated needs assessment as of today.
Mr. Beatty, can you talk about the county's programmatic, the resurfacing aspect? Because that was previously it was on a 12-year rotation. And now it's projected on being a 25. How is that gonna be beneficial?
Well, I can explain what I can and ask Director Maloney to help me out. Our initial list and our initial stab, we were thinking as a starting point, a 12-year program. Similar to the existing Penny is completing a lot of the program in 12 years. The previous resurfacing amount was about less than 50 million. So our thinking was as prices have almost doubled. And if we were going to continue with a 12-year, let's take the 50 and convert it to 100. So right now that 100 was based on past Penny expenditures over 12 years. And then the thinking was that this at the time could be a 12-year program. So the 100 million for resurfacing is something that you may want to consider. Mr. Maloney?
Totally agreed. Yeah, if it was a longer program, like 25 years, you could be coming around at the end of that with roads that might need to be revisited, certainly from the first Penny in resurfacing. So, something considerably more than that, like more than double that.
What is a general life expectancy of a roadway?
Well, there's, we're SCDOT's life expectancy, and SCAPA's equations of things like 20 years. Most municipal, private or small local streets go over 30 years before there's something as large as a full resurfacing or full depth reconstruction.
So is it possible that if we do if the Penny program funds one of these roads now, that in 20 years from now, they would have to get milled or grilled or ate up or chewed up or, you know, whatever they need to do to.
Like a major street project on here. Will likely need something of that, like that in 20 years, a heavily traveled road. In that case, it's if it was SCDOT, they would take care of that in their maintenance fund, or if it was City of Columbia, you know, they are asking for some of that in this list. But in most of our residential streets, it would be more like 30 years.
Mr. Beatty, there's also something about the DOT intersections.
But before we leave the programmatic, I want to just bring to your attention that at the time, we had also we'd included a percentage of the resurfacing and the sidewalk program going towards the City of Columbia. But since then, the City of Columbia has requested their own resurfacing and sidewalk monies. So there is a little bit of redundancy in the list. So that may be something that you would want to consider addressing or commenting on, is that there is a redundant identification of resurfacing and sidewalks for the City of Columbia. But to your point about the SCDOT projects, we received a number of projects from the SCDOT, and you can see it's quite a long list. It's almost a full page. Some of the projects that they provided, probably about 10, were already included in other categories. So I didn't place the exact same project twice.
Gotcha.
So these SCDOT projects are above and beyond the previous list of projects. And so that's why they're not included like in the Central Midlands Council of Government list.
Gotcha. And just for clarification, the COG list, I believe before you told us that that was a vetted list, and is that's a prioritized list that they've got, but is it something that has basically been in the works for 15, 20, so it's outdated, or is it fairly up to date?
Sure. I think I do. The Central Midlands Council of Government prepares a 20-year long-range plan, and they update it less than every 5 years.
Okay.
So the current 2045 plan is less than 5 years old. And what we did is we took the intersections from that plan, which have been vetted and prioritized. And that's what we included under the Central Midlands Council of Government projects.
Gotcha.
But those are separate from the SCDOT provided intersections. So the SCDOT provided intersections are really based on the local SCDOT traffic engineers' professional experience working in Richland County on a day-to-day basis. So they may have provided additional intersections that are not included in the Central Midlands Council of Government long-range plan.
Gotcha. And one more question about the City of Columbia's projects. Are those projects that they're seeking funding for that basically they're asking to manage it themselves, that the Penny program would just fund it? Or is it something that the Penny program would do? Does that make sense?
I think that question makes sense, but I do not know the answer as to how the City of Columbia would propose to manage the expenditures within the City of Columbia. I do not know that myself.
Okay. Anybody have any other questions for Mr. Beatty?
Chair,
Yes, sir.
as you walk through the process, and I certainly don't want to interrupt, but you brought some things to light as a part of the assessment. You mentioned, for example, that there was 100 million that was set aside for resurfacing, but that was on a 12-year look. And so part of the thing that TPAC could certainly do as you're getting that information is to make a determination, as is one of our recommendations, that we update that number to reflect a 25-year look. That the 100 million that was looked at for a 12-year look now reflects that,
200.
or something of that nature. So you certainly have Mr. Beatty, certainly have Mr. Maloney. So that's some of the style of recommendation, the style of input that you can provide that can help council shape, the number that they currently look at. So that's one of the areas that we know that wasn't a 25-year look when it was put into the assessment. It was a 12-year look. So that's just an example of that. He mentioned that you have organizations who have given you input as to what their needs were. So they weren't looking at other agencies. The county was, but the city of Columbia, for example, of Forest Acres, they're looking at their specific focus. So if there is a double ask, if there is a contemplated amount of money, then that money could, again, be used to broadly expand other opportunities because you've already accounted for it in more than one place. So as you talk about the principles, I think you're all going to talk about that with Attorney Jones. Those could be some of the things that kind of go into that as to where there are identified projects where multiple entities have asked for them, how are they considered, right? Are they, considered in some higher rate, lesser rate, or the monies, we asking for different thoughts about that. So just some additional things for you all to consider as TPAC as opportunities for you to give some direct input on, some of these project lists. Even though, again, the list is not all exhaustive and it's not the list, it is still some good information that you can provide related to the list that you have.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Beatty at Stantec? Yes, sir.
David, are these projects listed as like in a priority?
The projects listed under the Central Midlands Council of Government are prioritized.
Okay.
See if any others are prioritized. That is the only list that is prioritized.
Any other questions? Any questions online? No hands raised. All right. All right. Thank you, Mr. Beatty.
My pleasure.
We will now move back to Parker Poe. Mr. Ray.
Thank you for starting your meeting so promptly, Mr. Chair. We told them we were here to see Leonardo Brown and they decided to hold us up.
Oh, okay.
EIP, they didn't want us in.
Good return, boy.
Anyway, so we just wanted to, first, thanks for having us and it's good to see everybody again. Good to see some folks more recently than others. So you've already got a sense of the list, and the list continues to evolve. I know you haven't talked yet about some of your thoughts, right? Not yet.
As far as bringing projects forward.
Yeah, okay, all right, so we'll get there. We went to council and, went to transportation ad hoc, and then they've also gone to council. Transportation ad hoc has received lots of information from you all, and is appreciative and has considered the principles, has considered lots of the information that's come forward from this committee. I think you were at that last transportation ad hoc, and then county council has then also asked that the needs assessment sort of be finalized. As you all know, we're quickly working our way towards a bunch of deadlines associated with the penny. I want to remind this committee that there's 3 critical deadlines that are coming, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about council input on some of the principles. 3 critical deadlines are June 17th, which is really when we're looking for some final recommendations from the committee. And then on June 18th, the Transportation Ad Hoc Committee will then take a look at those final recommendations. And on June 25th, there's a work session scheduled for the county council that will basically review the work of TPAC and Transportation Ad Hoc. And so you're certainly invited. Those are all public meetings. Mr. Chair, you and members of TPAC are certainly invited. One of the things we discussed that might come out of the June 17th meeting is sort of a final blessing, if you will, on the project principles. Those are still being developed, as you know. You're going to hear some from Mr. Maloney today. And based upon what he says and based upon your input, we will then go back and make some further revisions and send them to this committee to be considered well in advance of the next committee meeting. Let you know what we're thinking there. Mr. Chair, you had also talked about the need for, or the desire, I think, for TPAC to express kind of its role, if you will, between the time that council approves the ordinance on the 16th of July, between there and the time that the referendum occurs on November 5th. And then, of course, prayerfully, it'll be approved. And so then what would TPAC's role be after that? And so we're just looking for the input of the committee on that to put in the final recommendation. On the principles themselves, I think there are two critical pieces of input that we wanted to share that have come from county council. One relates to what we call first penny projects, penny projects 1.0, items that were on the 2012 list that are unfunded, but what's the word you use? Unfunded, but can be accomplished, but you have a good word.
They're feasible.
Unfunded, but feasible. So in other words, we've got some projects that were funded that weren't feasible for various reasons. We've got some projects that are unfunded and unfeasible. And we have projects on the 2012 list that are unfunded but feasible, meaning if they had dollars, they could go forward. County Council remains laser focused on those projects and wants to give those projects priority in the principles. So you'll see in the next revision, you'll see sort of a super priority, if you will, almost like what'd you call it? A first launch on getting projects, leftover projects done, even before some of the current needs that are on the list are looked at. And the second thing, I think it was Ms. Newton, introduced a concept wanting to make sure that if a community was impacted in such a way that their primary ingress and egress was adversely affected by some condition, whether it be weather, whether it be deterioration of a roadway, but if it was the primary way of coming in or out of a community, special consideration needed to be given to that to make sure the community didn't get landlocked. And so we're going to incorporate a couple of ideas into the principles to address that. So those are the two main feedback, if you will, back to TPAC, wanting to prioritize 2012 projects that are unfunded but feasible, and making sure that we account for a community's sole access, ingress or egress, and making sure that if a project affects that it's given some special consideration. So those are two big points of feedback we have there. So other than giving you a sense of what's to come and a little bit of a review of what's happened since the last time we were together, Mr. Chair, we're here to answer questions, and then we'll defer to Mr. Maloney to talk a little bit more about his principal scoring.
I think one concern is, we already have what council has charged TPAC to do. And then they've gone and enhanced it with the Penny 2.0. My concern is, how do we make sure that TPAC is included going forward as far as doing what it is we've been charged to do? And that may sound like I'm talking in circles, but I know, and I'm not trying to stir a hornet's nest or start anything, but in my 2.5 years on this committee, nothing has ever been brought to us as far as for a recommendation or advice or anything with regards to any projects, programs, anything. I mean, and Ms. Eva, you've been on it longer than I have. And in your time, do you recall anything coming to TPAC?
Not since I've served.
So I think, and this isn't a gotcha moment or anything like that. It's just making sure that going forward, that the purpose of this committee is beneficial to those that have volunteered and gone through the process to get appointed by the designated municipalities and entities, I just hope that we're able to actually do what it is we're supposed to do. And that sounds like a long rambling speech, but hopefully you get the gist of basically allowing the committee to do what the committee has been charged to do, essentially. Anybody have anything else? You got anything else?
I can segue a little bit to what
Okay,
Mr. Williams
please.
is going to talk about. So one of the other ideas that was raised, I think it was by Chairwoman Mackey, as we're looking at principles, and y'all may remember last time we kind of put in some point categories. We assigned points to each of the principles. One of the things she said is, she said, well, how do you get to 25 points in the safety category? Like what are the things you might look at to get there? And same for the remaining categories. And so principles, that is. And so Mr. Maloney really sat down and kind of put on his public works and transportation hat and came up with some great thoughts that you've shared with us, and I think it'd be beneficial to share with them.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
All right. So I handed that out. It's page 2 of 2, page 1 of 2 with different subject matter, but page 2 of 2 is how you prioritize projects. We know that the county advancement projects generally are larger, identified singular projects. The community investment projects do have those funds, but they also had some identified projects and intersections and things as well. But how do you prioritize getting projects started? Well, we heard the one was the projects at the penny that we're underway with right now, that didn't have funding would be launched first. Okay. So there's really no scoring there. That's probably just a principle that's included. The rest of them were things that I've already, we've had in the read in the ordinance that had been kind of drafted to show a point system. And the point system may have come partly from this committee and ad hoc, but that point system, we didn't change, but we agreed with you. How do you get there? Well, if you have additional funding, you could get 1 point. So outside funding, additional point for every 10% contribution by the outside funding source, such that the outside funding source provides 100% funding. That project would have 10 points in that category, which is what was slated for it. We do have a project we're launching right now called Crucible Road Sidewalk. And that has $250,000 coming from CTC, Transportation Group. And that, may cover it all. I mean, we're going to be bidding it out very soon. We'll know. But, it'll be some percentage probably of penny and some percentage of CTC. And, when we look at that, we'd have an estimate for it and say, that project, maybe we at the time thought it was 100%, so we'd get 10 points to be launched out. Overall impact cost ratio. This one you could have other thoughts on, because I had one. And one thought was for every 1,000 average daily traffic volume, for every 1,000 you get a point. So why did I choose 1,000 for a point? Well, 20 points is the maximum. And when you get to 20,000 ADT, you're talking about getting into the arterial roads around the county. Elmwood has 43,000 vehicles coming and going on it down by the intersection of Bull. Bull has 28,000. So you heavy traveled roads would easily provide that kind of volume, and max it out. Lower volume would be less. So that's the one thing I saw that's measurable, because we do this, we want it to be measurable, that we can go back and tell you, well, we use this to get there. Not just like, we thought, it's heavy. we have measurable metrics to use. Safety, the same thing. So to get to 25 points, that would be maximum safety. So you're looking at intersection, for instance. So every signalized crosswalk would be worth 2 points, or 8 points for just the crosswalks that you're providing for pedestrians that would be within the signalized area. And then 10 points for every mile of new sidewalk. So that would help with sidewalk projects, for instance, about getting towards the maximum. You got 2.5 miles of sidewalk in the project. If you're doing both sides of the road, that's just 1.25 miles of road, but that would get you to the maximum safety area there where a road didn't have sidewalk, now does. 5 points for every ability to meet 4-hour pedestrian warrant analysis with improved traffic control. So warrant analysis, in other words, is saying that you've got enough side traffic volume and is warranting that you have improved traffic control. So you've done things correctly, which they should be before you put a signal in, and you're providing warrant analysis. So 5 points for that. 5 points for reducing the vehicle-to-vehicle conflicts by 50%. Well, that can be done with geometry. And our greatest safety reduction to date is on Kennerly-Kugler intersection. That's a roundabout. Okay, that reduced conflicts from, 16 to 4. 5 points for reducing vehicle to pedestrian conflicts by 50%. We were talking to some people about Atlas Road, the part that council rescoped. If you can get from one side of the road to a refuge point, a refuge being a pedestrian refuge being, say, 8 feet or wider in the middle of the road, you've cut down on the conflicts by 50% to that point where they can get to a safe place and then only have to go to the other. So there's different means and methods that can occur to get that, but I just wanted to give you an example. So those are some of the safety things we thought of, being both vehicle and pedestrian safe. And then overall condition, improvement of the overall condition. 5 points for restoring the roadway system surfaces, 3 points for removing standing water. So that means you're starting to think about how you're not just kind of putting things back the way they are, but you've investigated and things that say rot pavement, create hazards for vehicles, create hazards for pedestrians. You're looking at those and removing them. And so 3 points for that, 3 points for adding a drainage system in concert with the geometry, 5 points for the ability to clear aged and run down roadside blight within the right of way. So that's overall condition. And I have draft under that. So so think about, we disagree with that many points for that versus this. Economic development, 20 points was slated. 10 points for opening a transportation corridor to a planned county development area. 10 points for supporting a committed economic development project. And 5 points for providing capacity to alternative roadways or intersections that will serve the ingress and egress routes for the planned economic development areas. So when you look at, somewhere we know that there's going to be development and there's roads extending within it, that's planned development. But then when you look at the fact that we're widening Blythewood Road, for instance, to the north of that, that's going to be a alternative transportation corridor kind of outside that development. And then stakeholder support. So public and state, 5 points for a project identified in the 2024 transportation needs assessment, 5 points for a project indicated in the upper 50% of priority by the stakeholder, or 10 points to a project in the upper 25% of priority by the stakeholder. And that's where we would get that kind of input from the stakeholder, which we may or may not have right now.
I have a question. I noticed you are on, you're referring to
highly trafficked areas, like where there are a lot of pedestrian and a lot of traffic. What about the low country where their needs are there, but then we don't have that same flow of traffic? How are you prioritizing that?
One of the things we noticed in the Eastover area that had been identified by the Quagger, 4, 5, 6, somewhere in that neighborhood, intersection improvements. So even though there's not a lot of travel, there's been accidents and there's
Exactly.
unsafe intersections. So that would, a lot of that would be covered within the safety aspect. The only one that kind of, I think would be of concern that you're talking about is the one, number 3. That would
Okay.
that would add points to some projects that have higher traffic volume. But I think all these other areas, improving the overall condition, adding safety, potentially economic development, and providing outside funding would all be capable in a, you know, a quieter but road that does need to be taken care of. So it was really one out of really 6 other or 5 other categories that kind of would impact that. So the one that says overall input at cost ratio. So maybe for number 3, you know, I am just talking about overall impact. Maybe there should be something at cost ratio in there as well.
Yeah, well, I just understand, you know, I know all of the areas have been getting attention, with the exceptions of the low Richmond area, that's specifically Eastover, and some of the middlemen passing this penny tax this year. So I just don't see the equity where we're getting, I notice you are developing areas like Blackwood where they have a greater economic base than we are. Doesn't seem equitable for you to look in those areas that something can be somewhat self-sufficient and then give us the same matrix that you're giving those other areas. I think there should be some priority, you should have some priority as opposed to those areas, because 50 people walking the street versus 2, the accident ratio is still the same. You know, depending on traffic volumes.
Depending on the outcome.
Yeah.
So this was for the larger projects, kind of individual projects. Really don't think that this would be necessary for programmatic projects like resurfacing and dirt roads. Because those are, you know, those will be capped at whatever they are. And then the equity is built into chapter 21 of the county ordinances, which is based on inventory. So there's twice as much inventory, for instance, of dirt roads in District 10 than any other district in the county. And so that amount of funding is required already by ordinance to be there for that. So we're launching projects in the dirt road paving program. There's supposed to be that set of what they call in the ordinance pro rata.
But would that be, and looking at District 10, if they have emphasis on the dirt road pavings and stuff like that, if it met that 20 million mark, would that mean after that, then District 10 wouldn't be a priority for projects?
No.
Because they had met that threshold?
No, well, there's a demand throughout the county for that same thing, but it does say that you should do this many miles in there because they have, you know, out of 215 miles, they have 50 miles there. So 1/5 of all projects of dirt road happen there. And we just did a prorata to check where we are now. So we're, you know, planning to put 4 more miles out this summer as far as District 10.
Gotcha.
If there's an intersection project identified, which there is, that would just be kind of looking at it compared for safety and need on these other metrics.
Gotcha. Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes.
In reference to the $20 million that you mentioned, that's kind of been put out there as a part of the overall process. remember that number is at least,
At least.
you know, so at a minimum, it's not this is all you'll get. Once a district hits this number, there is no other contemplation. That is, equity to say that at least every district can be assured so that any Richland County residents living in any district in Richland County knows that if this penny gets their vote or ultimately passes, that at a minimum, every single one of the 11 districts will have projects that will have been funded by the citizens choosing to put the penny in place.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Anything else from you, sir?
Goes on, follow up on that.
Well, I mean, I think you raised a couple of really interesting points. One is that we have needs that are, or the needs list breaks down specific potential projects, but then it also has buckets of money for programs like resurfacing. And the large projects, the larger projects that aren't within those programmatic expenditures are anticipated to be primarily driven by this priority, whereas the programmatic expenditures are already being expended under a county ordinance that attempts to make sure there's equity, right? I mean, I think that's in council, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Brown, but council has spent a lot of time talking about the dirt road paving ordinance in particular to make sure it's equitable. So one of the things the principles say that these dollars will be spent in accordance with county ordinance. So they will in no way be overridden by what's here today. So that equitability, particularly in the program expenditures, will still be there. I think that's important, and that's a good point. So our job at this point is to try to synthesize what Mr. Maloney has provided with any input of the committee. Obviously, we want to listen. So for instance, one of the issues raised about community impact, ingress and egress, and making sure that those projects, even if they serve a small community, if it's a one way in, one way out community, that it's given priority. Like we've got a couple of ideas about where to put some multipliers in the scoring to make sure. So, you know, not necessarily doesn't matter how many roads, but if you got people living there and that's the only way in and out, then that needs to get some higher priority. So we've got some things we'll add here and come back in the next round of the principles for the committee to look at. That's all we have.
I just totally went to a blank. Yes.
So if in fact this matrix basically looks at larger projects, then is it a way in principles we can define what would be considered a larger project and what would be considered maybe a smaller project that wouldn't fall under this matrix?
I think anything that's not in a group like resurfacing or dirt roads. We currently have that for sidewalks as well. So I think sidewalks, though, should be identified for safety as far as priority. So, however, dirt roads and resurfacing already have programmatic IDs, like we're taking care of the worst first and resurfacing. And then also, though, making sure we're providing that equity around the county of it. And, you know, someone asked me, well, what if the roads are all worse in one area? Well, they're not. We've checked. They're not just, they all wear out similarly. So as far as resurfacing goes, that equity that's built in, if you have of the 655 miles we now have of paved roads, you know, and if you're in a district with 10% of that, you know, you should get 10% of the funding to keep doing that. And so that's there, just like with dirt road paving. It provides that equity around the county based on where the inventory is.
I remembered what my question was, and it was actually for you, Director Maloney. When a project is formulated, what's the process of submitting it for approval. So is it? Is, cause and we've been at meetings where people say, you just do what you wanna do. And we know that to not be true. You gotta love the political silly season. So. For instance, dirt roads or an intersection in Eastover. Where does it begin? And after you get all your information and stuff, and then you go to present it, who do you present it to?
I have Mr. Brown right over here to my right if I need any help with this, but that's what we need to develop. So I think at the last meeting I just mentioned, I've been part of a thing where we've had and we do this at Public Works. We call it the CTIP. It's going to get approved this week. I believe it's at council for the 2024-25 roads that we're going to proceed with, get approved by council. And it's a list of roads that need resurfacing and dirt roads that, no, not dirt roads, paving. That's right. We're not getting into that at Public Works yet, but resurfacing and preservation in that case of Public Works. And in this, it seems like a major annual plan would be developed each year and come through this kind of process of reviewing it as compared to other projects that are here on this list to say these are the ones that rose the highest. Now to do that, we do need to go through all the projects preliminarily, I believe, to get to a baseline on that. I don't think there's any way to avoid that. Say we've got this deep bag of projects and these ones are the ones that we found. We need to know, we need to know what all the projects look like as far as how they would score and then bring those high scoring ones through an annual plan each year. And that might answer your question as far as, what's the role going forward.
So is it within, and I'm not sure exactly who this question would be directed to, but would it be in this committee's purview of TPAC being the initial submission point for these projects? And then have TPAC review and then make a recommendation to, I'm assuming, ad hoc, who then goes up to council? Would that be?
Yes, that's a good question. So let's talk practically, then let's talk aspirationally. Okay, so practically means what we have to get done as the county. Okay, and then aspirationally is what we might want to accomplish to make sure that we can increase as much input and opportunity for these projects to kind of see the daylight in a very open process. And I think it's kind of what you're talking about. So practically speaking, Director Maloney will have to, so I'm saying, thank you, the penny has passed, and now we're talking about what happens now the penny has passed. Okay, so let's make some assumptions. So process-wise, like we do in other areas of county government, if you remember earlier when the county did have the penny and we were doing the bands, then there will be a list every year that was developed that then went and said, council, here's what we're going to do so that the money can be released so that the program can move forward and anticipate these projects. You are talking about a similar situation. And in order to do that, that means like we're meeting today, TPAC would have to get the information. You would then basically have to, at that meeting, provide, advice that you wanted to give related to those projects, because ultimately what Maloney will have to do, and we're making lots of assumptions, Maloney is here, he's doing it, is that every year he would have to, at a certain time, present the information so that council could then have the expectation of what funds need to be released that will be spent for the project year. So that what I'm saying to you is that wouldn't be a situation where you could have multiple like advisory meetings and saying, well, we'll get to this. It would have to be, you have an advisory meeting. Here's what our advice is for these list of projects that we see you taking up to the council or to the committee, Maloney. And here's kind of our input on that. That could be shared with the ad hoc committee, but that would be certainly the opportunity to do that. But Maloney could not hold up what he has to do if TPAC was not able to meet, or they felt like we want to have more time to give advice depending on the deadlines so that we can meet all of our practical responsibilities, you would just have to weigh that in. So there is room for that. And I think aspirationally, that makes sense. We just have to make sure that as we get better and better about doing what we're doing, that is what's done. So like today, for example, in your meeting, you talked about maybe 2 or 3 things where you have an opportunity as an advisory committee to give some direct feedback. We talked about the $100 million look, right? And you may be leading up to doing something or not, I don't know. We talked about the double considerations for where the county may have passed some things, other municipalities may have passed some things where they talk about the same thing and they're asking for the basically duplicate funding, right? You have an opportunity, as you hear Attorney Jones talking about the different principles and what council has kind of provided additional feedback on. So all of these are elements in which, as an advisory body, you are able to then say, here is our advice on how we would like you to consider these things. Because if we leave out of this group, for example, and go to ad hoc or go to council, and there's no additional advice, it's not that council or ad hoc is not going to take action. They just won't have any additional advice. So they'll just make the decision that they're making, utilizing what input they already have. That would not be to the detriment of TPAC. It would just be saying, we have not received any additional advice. And so we're going to use what we have at our current disposal. You are a resource to allow them to consider things that they may not have otherwise been considering and open up their horizons and open up their thought process. So if there's ever information that doesn't come from TPAC, it doesn't mean that council is ignoring TPAC. It just means that you do have the opportunity to provide advice. That advice could be no advice, right? So those are things that you all get to consider as the advisory committee. You know, what you want to comment on, when you want to comment on it, and in what ways you want to comment on it to get back to council. So the old process, remember that from what my understanding is, at one point in time, TPAC got together, they decided on or helped form the list. And then that list was included as a part of the referendum. So from that spot, the voters that did approve it already had a general idea of what was going to happen. What TPAC, my understanding was after that was they were kind of the way the checks and balances to make sure that it was happening, to make sure the citizens got information, to kind of keep abreast of what was going on now that the program had been approved. Here, you're looking on, like you mentioned earlier, an expanded opportunity. You're looking at an opportunity to be a part of the process in the beginning, a part to be the continual part of the process, and to help advise council of how you can also keep them informed and help them have a better process than maybe, if I could use a term that Attorney Jones said, as Penny 1.0 as compared to potential Penny 2.0. So there's some growth and development in that that you may not see or know today because we're still on the process of getting this thing to the council so they can potentially get it on the ballot. And then after that, how we develop this, there's not an end to that because we can always be better. And you have the opportunity to decide advice as how we continue to make this better for the TPAC as well as the transportation personnel who are responsible for the implementation of the penny. So it's a lot of talking, but it's not an end all be all today is the point. I think the first time around, people thought it was an end all be all. It is not that. The council has communicated, we want flexibility, we want adaptability. That's the main thing that they're trying to focus on by putting these principles in place so that TPAC, as an example, can provide advice when new things come up that maybe were not anticipated.
Gotcha. Yeah. Anybody have any more questions? Online, anybody? Do we have, Mr. Jones, do we have any, anything else that you want to cover?
No, sir, just if the committee has any specific feedback it wants to share on any of the items discussed, it would be great to get that.
And Mr. Beatty, if you could send me this list in a file so I can send it out to the members that are not here today. I'm sure they would appreciate that.
I'll do that.
So at this point, at our next meeting on the 17th, we should hopefully before then, Mr. Jones, have kind of like a final draftish
Yes, sir.
thing that you'll get out to us soon, hopefully, to give us some time to review. And then at our next meeting will be our opportunity to approve that plan to present up to ad hoc,
Yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir.
So at this point, if there's any input, ideas, suggestions that we have, now is definitely the time to share them. I will send out an email, if not tonight, in the morning to everyone, so we've got one thread. So if there's anything that anybody wants included or added or anything, you know, we'll have this one thing. So at the end of it, you can just take this one email and forward it to Mr. Jones, and he can go through the.
I guess I have one last question.
Yes, sir.
When are the projects gonna be decided upon and finalized?
So,
Got it.
No, you're good. So let's answer it in two parts. I'll make a statement and then you can finish it up.
Sure.
So this list of the needs assessment.
Mhm.
I just want to we've said this a couple of times, make this clear. This is not like the first penny. So everything listed on here, while it is in consideration, does not mean that this is an all exhaustive list that will be the only things that are accomplished. So this is closed out now. So this is the needs assessment from Stantec. So this is closed. So we won't be receiving any other needs assessment projects through any other mechanisms related to Stantec. So I'll go ahead and say that part. So you will have that. So now that this is done, council can have an opportunity to share with the general public a general assessment of needs that has been contemplated. Okay, and then from there, I'll let you close out the rest of it.
no, that's right. And that list of needs, question of, well, how do we know what's going to be done first? Well, what we know is we know that we have these principles that the committee's been looking at and the scoring that we know, and we know that these will be applied by the transportation department. And so this will be a dynamic process that we will not be fixed in priority because things could change over time. For instance, here's a perfect example. Let's say you let's say you prioritize the projects today, but 3 years from now, one of the projects got significant federal funding. Well, under our principles, that project would be highly prioritized because we want to match the funding. So we don't want to do something today that is so fixed that it makes it hard for the program to be managed. Or, God forbid, we have another flood like we had, what was back in 2015. These principles are designed to allow the transportation department, TPAC, county council to manage the program going forward. And we'll also have something that we call emerging needs. So, this is the best list of needs that we can compile as of June 3rd, 2024. It's the best data we've got. But there will be things that happen over a 25-year penny. Those are emerging needs. And so we intend for the emerging needs for there to be a process and a procedure for them to be submitted and to go through these principles. So if there's anything that we leave you with, it is that the work that we have asked you all to do to tell us what principles are important. Y'all have done that. I mean, y'all have done it well. And so in other words, to go to your question, if you look at the way the principles work, 25 points are assigned from safety. So any project, when you go down and look, that's an intersection or a project that is designed to enhance the safety of a road, clearly those are going to be prioritized projects based upon the way you all have articulated the principles And based upon the project scoring that you all have recommended and so far council has adopted, nothing's over until July 16th, but so you all have had a huge say in how the needs will be prioritized because you all have helped shape the principles through which the needs will be analyzed. Does that make sense? Yeah, okay. So I guess to answer your question, when, I reckon Mr. Maloney will start on November the 6th, the day after that penny passes. And we contemplate that regular reports will be made on what projects are being done when, and maybe some of that reporting, which like you've been doing now, it'll be important for the committee to see that reporting and understand what's happening. But if somebody comes to you in the community and says, what's important in this penny? I wouldn't show them this long list. I'd show them the principles y'all been talking about. And I'd say, it's county advancement and it's community investment. And I'd say, we're prioritizing safety, we're prioritizing economic development, and this is how that's going to work. Hopefully that, and we're also going to prioritize the things that didn't get done in the last penny, which if you're from the Lower Richland area, I know that's been something that's been talked about through this entire, so if somebody says, are we going to prioritize things that didn't get done in the last penny? As we stand today, the principles give them super priority. So, sorry for the sermon, Mr. Chair.
Is, so 25 years, what's if you've got 4.2 billion on here on paper, is that about what that 25-year projection is, that 4.2 billion?
No, so there's a couple of numbers, and if you're interested, I can send the committee the current copy of the ordinance the council has been reading. Is that right? Oh boy, might be here a little while. So we asked, and we're still working with Mr. Beatty to get inflation adjusted numbers. He's given us, I know, one pass at different years, different inflation rates. So if you look at the ordinance right now, it says, based upon everything we've got in front of us, we anticipate that the inflation adjusted cost of all the projects, meaning not just what you see here, but also the comment related projects, is about $8 billion over 25 years. We're not going to collect that much money. And so then we go on to say that we've projected based upon what we did with the last penny. And again, you got to figure out how to grow it, which is kind of more art than science. Projecting we're going to collect somewhere around $4.5 billion over 25 years. And because we have total cost of 8, we're only going to collect 4.5. We talk about why it's important that we have principles to determine how we're going to spend the money. Gotcha. And so that's all in the ordinance right now. The other things in the ordinance right now, Mr. Brown, check me on this. I think we've got the way the money is split up right now. It's 50% to county advancement projects, 30% to community and investment projects, and 20% to the comment right now, which is still subject to review by county council. Gotcha. So if y'all would like a copy, that's a public document. If you'd like a copy of that, I'll send that along to you. At least show you what.
Is that the May 17th version, or is there a version
Yes.
after that?
No, that's the.
I think last week.
Okay, well then, I think it's so important, we'll give it to you twice.
But that would be, if you could send this to me too, so we can also send
Which one is that? You got?
the May 17th.
Oh, yeah,
You may have already sent this.
no, that's fine.
I'll double check, but do what?
think I sent it.
Okay, well, just so
Anything you'll need.
we got it in. Anybody have anything else? Any other questions? Anybody? All right, well. It's 4:58. We are adjourned. We'll see y'all in 2 weeks. Thank y'all.